voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. I think I've figured out the Trump plan. I think I've got it. I think I've figured out what our evil genius is up to. I think I've got it. I think, it took some time, but I think the plan is finally blossoming, and it's basically we're going to allow the nation to get infected. It's a brilliant plan. We're going to allow the nation to get infected. Our sly genius has figured this out. Let the nation get sick. Let Corona spread everywhere. And because look, Mexico refused to pay for the big, beautiful wall, right? They refused right from the start. We're not paying for it. And Donald Trump said, yes, you will pay for our big, beautiful wall. So here's the genius part. Here's where the evil genius, the sly genius has figured this out. He's going to make it so no one wants to come to the U.S. And he's going to make it to where no one will let us go to their country. He's going to make the U.S. one of those S-hole countries that he was talking about. So Mexico will finally build the wall themselves with financial help from the rest of the world to keep us away from them. It is brilliant. Absolute sheer genius. Because I don't know if you saw the report over this weekend. There's a northern Mexican town basically pleading with the Mexican government to restrict cross-border movement. Keep those Americans out of here. Because look, they don't want infected tourists. They don't want diseased travelers bringing the U.S. coronavirus to Mexico. And over the weekend, like I said, there's a border town of Arizona, this town of Sonora, who use their own vehicles to block the roads that lead to this beach town, Puerto Penasco, I think it is. And they're going to continue to do this because they don't want us there. And it got me thinking about, can you imagine the Mexican president coming out saying, we need a wall. We need a big, beautiful wall. Because Americans, they're bringing us virus. The Americans, they're bringing illness. They're coughers who refuse to cover their mouths. And some, I assume, are good people. But they refuse to wear masks. They refuse to social distance. They refuse to wash their hands. They're dirty, dirty people. Can you imagine the Mexican president saying that? No, basically that's what, our president said about them. They're rapists and murderers and horrible people and all that. But can you imagine the argument of, hey, we got to stay away from them damn Americans. They're dangerous. They're diseased. And I point to, again, this is another one of those moments where you just scratch your head and go, we're screwed as a country. A guy who was the former head of the World Bank during the Bush years, a guy named Jim Young Kim. He's an American. He served both Democratic and Republican administrations. He said, and this is basically what I've been saying from the beginning, he said the thing that's driving him crazy is that we've decided that the standard health response, the only thing that's worked in any of the countries that have suppressed the virus, is something we're just not going to do. We're not going to wear masks. We're not going to social distance. We're not going to wash our hands. We're not going to do the contact tracing. We're not going to do the things that we know work. We've got no containment strategy. We've got no strategy. And he's right. This is the frustrating part of this. And, you look at Tulsa right now. The One Health expert there say, well, the Trump rally likely contributed to the spike that we're having in the coronavirus spreading. Well, of course it did. I know one guy who got it there, Herman Cain, who's still in the hospital down in Atlanta. The guy who told you don't wear a mask hours before he announced, I've got it. And the thing is we're just, stupid. And I got to tell you, I think the wall will now get built. I think Mexico will now pay for the big, beautiful wall to keep us the hell out of there. Because we're just not going to do the right thing. And I know the right wants to frame this as a political, I know Trump wants to frame this in political terms of, us versus them. And it's not Democrats versus Republicans. It's not conservatives and those libtards. It's not that at all. It's people who are willing to listen to science and those who are just freaking stupid. Which is why all the Ivy League schools, and again, the smart people, the Ivy League schools have canceled all of their sporting activities through and until at least January 1st of 2021. So there'll be nothing in the Ivy League schools. Now you go, well, who cares? Nobody wants to watch Princeton and Yale play football, and which is kind of true on a certain level. But at least they're going, hey, we don't really want to spread this thing. We're smarter than that. We're the smart ones. We're the scientists who are telling you dopes to wear the damn mask and wash your stupid hands and not cough on each other. Things that your mother should have taught you as a kid. If you have to cough, cough into your elbow. But I guess we're just not going to do that. And here's the thing. I know a lot of people say, well, Donald Trump, he's doing such a great job. You look in the areas that are spiking. You look in the areas that the numbers are going up exponentially because guess what? Stupid people were stupid. We now are seeing that there's a shortage of personal protective equipment again. And you go, I understand, a little bit understood it at the very beginning in New York when they were having to wear trash bags or having to put hand sanitizer inside of their mask to use it multiple days. Kind of a little bit, because you could argue that the administration, who wasn't clearly paying attention, got caught blindsided. They got caught flat-footed. You could make that argument, but we're pretty long into this. You would think that you would ramp up production and have massive stores already, so that you don't have to continue to reuse these single-use N95 masks for 2 weeks. That we could get people the surgical masks that they need to do intake while admitting patients who may have the virus with better fitting masks that don't cover half their head. Maybe we could come up with a way to ensure that nurses don't have to continue to reuse the masks. In fact, the largest nursing organization in the country, they did a survey of their members in June, found 85% of them were forced to reuse what are disposable N95 masks. And that's not even talking about we got a whole bunch of KN95s, the cheap Chinese knockoffs that are crap. We still haven't done that. And now what's happening? The political battle over, are we going to send kids back to school? The political battle over our children's health and safety has already begun. Last night we tweeted out, would you send your kids, should we open up schools? Would you send your kids back? Overwhelmingly, the response was hell no. Overwhelmingly no. And the thing that gets me is, we've begun the battle in the way that we've become accustomed to opening up important policy matters to be discussed and debated via Twitter. Clearly our system broken. But you've got Trump coming out saying that they're gonna pull money away from the schools if they don't reopen. Now, understand, most of us do know that most education funding comes from the local government, the local and the state government. If you live in a good address, if you live in a school district that has high property values, your school probably gets less state money and probably no federal money. So Trump's threat is not going to affect them at all. So you're going to see the well-to-do schools who have the resources to do whatever the hell they want without interference from the state or the federal government protecting their children. So I say, look to those schools for guidance when you're talking about opening up working class area schools or poverty-ridden area schools. Don't go by what Trump's saying. But here again, you've got this pressure to push people back. And I thought it was interesting that today the NEA, the National Education Association president, Lily Eskelsen Garcia, was on CNN. And, she was spot on saying, look, this isn't a bar we're talking about. These are second graders who are crammed into classrooms. She said that when she was, teaching, she had 39 sixth graders in one class, 39 kids in a class. And she framed it as perfectly as a teacher can frame things for a child. When she said, I double dog dare Donald Trump to sit in the classroom of 39 sixth graders and breathe that air without any preparation for how we're going to bring our kids back safely. So she's laid down the gauntlet in a way that Donald Trump can possibly understand. Double dog dare you in very, very Trumpian terms. And this is where you just go, this is, and in all seriousness, this is the most powerful country in the history of civilization, the wealthiest country in the history of civilization, at its wealthiest point still. This is a country that others have looked to for guidance my entire life. And we are seeing on every level, at every point, our prowess and our leadership questioned, diminished, destroyed, and missing. And I know this is a political season. I get that this is all about, November, but we truly have a guy in the White House who doesn't care about your kids. And today's, comments, are right there with that in mind. They're threatening the CDC on guidance. We talked about it yesterday that you had the Health and Human Services Secretary saying, well, the schools shouldn't hide behind the CDC's guidance. And now the CDC's evidently going to rewrite their guidance, which you go, this is the wrong time to send that kind of message. People need clear guidance and clear leadership. And to have a president who's going to threaten them, this is where we get. And the scary part for me is that the poor school districts, they're going to get pushed into it. The people who are already most vulnerable, the black and brown communities are already most vulnerable in all of this. The people who already don't have health insurance and access to preventative care. It's going to get worse. And we, again, I didn't have to break out my crystal ball for this. I didn't need, to have my little seance to talk to the spirits. You don't need to be very bright to figure out that if you're pushing people back into group settings, bad things are going to happen. Because we know we're Americans. We're Americans, damn it. We don't wear masks. We don't wash our hands. We do what we want. And what we want appears to be, infecting our neighbors. Now, look, as Trump has said, vast majority of people, they're going to do okay. The numbers are like 95% of people are going to recover. Some people are going to get really, really sick. I've known a number of people who have had it, and they don't tell easy stories. They recovered, but it was a fight. And they're still worried about what the after effects down the road are going to be. Because again, we don't know. We don't know if there's a boomerang effect that brings it back. We don't know. So the best thing to do is don't get it. And we used to be kind of smart about that. But evidently not now. So as I said, I think this is part of the Trump master plan to finally get the wall built. That's the only thing I can think of. Either that or he's got a whole bunch of money tied up in the vaccine that might come at some point down the road. Scare us enough, infect enough people so that he can cash in. Again, the fact that I question that tells us where we are in this moment in our country's history. But in my view, November cannot come fast enough. to elect him out of office in January really can't come fast enough to throw his you-know-what out the you-know-where and kick him in the new you-know-where on the way out. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Would you send your kids back to school here in the fall? Is that something on the mind? Or do you think it's not going to be safe? You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend Scott Paul is going to be here to share some thoughts on some of the information coming out about China, some of the stuff that we know. And look, if our influence is waning, someone's got to fill that void. And will it be China? Sadly, it looks like it is. Quick break. Right back with our good friend Scott Paul. Stick around.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1939. That was the day AFL President William Greene called all affiliates to meet in Chicago. Greene sought to mobilize union leaders in a fight to restore prevailing wages on federal relief projects. Building tradesmen on WPA construction sites had started walking off the job in spontaneous strikes across the country 3 days earlier. The strike spread rapidly to 36 states, quickly turning into a nationwide walkout of over 150,000. Workers were outraged by provisions in the latest federal relief bill titled the Woodrum Act. New terms established the 130-hour rule, essentially slashing wages by more than half. It also called for a 30-day dismissal of all workers who had been on WPA rolls for 18 months. The AFL Building Trades Department stated the act would, quote, destroy national wage standards established through 50 years of collective bargaining. IBEW leader Daniel Tracy added that forcing a lower wage on federal relief workers would only aid building contractors in private industry to do the same. From St. Louis to Rochester, from Minneapolis to Akron, picket lines were solid. Organizers worked to build solidarity among unskilled WPA workers affected by the new starvation bill. Tens of thousands of strikers were fired in WPA-ordered dismissals. President Roosevelt declared there could be no strikes against the federal government. Attorney General Frank Murphy, former Michigan governor during the Flint sit-down strike, declared that striking against the government would build a fascist psychology. WPA administrators also threatened organizers with federal prosecution, fines, and jail time. But New York's Building and Construction Trades Council leader Thomas Murray authorized a strike of 32,000. He avowed, "This will be a strike to the finish."
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So remember how we were talking about all of the PPE money, the Paycheck Protection Plan money that was supposed to go to helping small businesses and employers stay afloat? Remember that? And we found out yesterday, as we talked about, a whole bunch of ideological hate groups. They got a boatload of money. A whole bunch of people who were extremely well-connected, family members of Mitch McConnell's wife. They got a whole bunch of money. But the iconic suit maker Brooks Brothers, evidently they just filed bankruptcy. The last major suit maker in the U.S. And look, I don't own a Brooks Brothers suit, could never afford it, but still, the reality is I don't think we make any. And that's a serious problem, and it's something that we have to talk about on how we move this country forward. And like I said yesterday, thank goodness Joe Biden has come around a little bit on this issue, and he has a new plan out. Here to share some thoughts on that plan and how we rebuild our manufacturing, especially our strategic emergency reserves. I've asked Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's always great to be with you, man.
So, I look at this news that, Brooks Brothers has gone out of business, and look, I clearly can't afford their suits, but that's it. That's pretty much the game. I mean, Hartmarks, they were gone a couple years ago. There have been a bunch of others that have gone by the wayside. We're now dependent for something as simple as clothing on China and elsewhere.
Yeah, we are. We have been for a while. I mean, more than well over 90%, in fact, closer to 95% of apparel is imported. And a lot of it comes from China. And I will say, in my in my occupation, I've had to wear suits when I was on Capitol Hill or at the AFL-CIO or in this job. I certainly don't anymore. I'm wearing a T-shirt today, but in that time, I always look for American-made suits. And you're right, I could look for Hart Schafter marks back in the day. I remember when they had a facility in Indiana. I'm an Indiana native. I actually visited. It was very cool to see kind of where some of your clothes were made. And then Brooks Brothers is another one, and I own a few of those products as well. And I always loved the fact that they made American-made ties in New York City. I think Trump could see him from Trump Tower where they made these ties, but Trump couldn't figure out how to do it in New York City. He imported all his ties from China and other countries. But that's about it. Joseph Abboud still does make some suits. But he'll be the last one standing, and it is it's distressing, and it doesn't have to be this way. I guess that's the thing. It's like our rules are so stacked against these guys, and there are virtually no tariffs on imported clothing at all, even if they're made, and we know they are, with sweatshops, with kids. We've seen these reports to China about forced labor camps for religious minorities like the Uyghurs. It's terrible, and I just this brand has been around for centuries. I mean, literally, almost 2 centuries. And Abraham Lincoln died in a Brooks Brothers suit. They've survived a couple of world wars and recessions, and here they are. And yeah, I don't see anyone, unfortunately, clamoring to help them. Even though I would view it as incredibly important to have that capacity, that textile capacity in the United States for lots of different reasons. And so we'll see what happens next. And perhaps someone will buy them and deploy their assets somehow. But it's a really sad day for people who
But
care
here's the
about
thing.
made in America.
And this is where, I come back to yesterday's, Joe Biden response, which is, on masks and on emergency needs for health care, for medical supplies and medicines and stuff like that. We're going to evidently start bringing some of that back. And I would argue, about a decade too late, but hey, better late than never. Because I'll tell you, Joe Biden was my fifth choice. And a big part of that had to do with his response when asked if China was a problem. And he said, no, China's not a problem. And he went into a whole bunch of reasons why he thought China was not a big problem. This tells me Joe can learn, and maybe he's going to change his direction a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to go all the way into his record because he took some bad votes on trade in the Congress. A lot of people did. I didn't agree with them on the TPP when he was in the Obama administration. But I do think that there's, even over the last decade, been a lot of reckoning in terms of what China has done, what globalization has done, and there's new evidence. And I think there's some recognition that the way that Democrats approached this in the past isn't going to work anymore, and we shouldn't go back to that. The problem is a lot of people with money, the investment banks, the big companies, are going to try to persuade him otherwise, unfortunately, and the editorial boards will be right there with them, and so we still have a lot of work to do. But I will say I was heartened by the plan. I read it. It's my job to look at all these policies, and I was, we were encouraging the Trump administration at the very outset of this to better utilize the Defense Production Act, to build resilient supply chains, to have that capacity to use procurement, to do all of these things. And even though they made promises, I mean, Rick, I'll bet you remember this, back in February or March, Peter Navarro was talking about a Buy America executive order for pharmaceuticals. It still doesn't exist, still does not exist to this day. And so we are overdue for some leadership. And I think that this plan does make a lot of sense. I mean, it uses procurement, it uses the Defense Production Act, it uses a lot of those types of mechanisms. It recognizes also that China has not been a great actor here, and that we shouldn't be dependent on China or Russia for these supplies. And the step that it takes kind of beyond what Trump has articulated about this. Well, I mean, Trump hadn't done much of this at all, but he's articulated it, is that, and what Biden says differently, is that we also want to put our allies in a position of not being dependent on Russia or China either. And so we all have to grow our capacities. And I'm okay with this. I'm okay if Europe grows its capacity. I think that's a good thing. But to unwind this dependency that too many countries have on China.
Right.
And so I think it's welcome. I mean, obviously, people who like Joe Biden are going to like this plan. People who like Donald Trump aren't going to like this plan. But I say just reviewing it as a public policy person, I think it's a great supply chain plan. And I know that along with that the president and his campaign, I'm not that Joe Biden and his campaign also said in the near future they'll be coming out with a manufacturing plan. And so I'll be looking forward to seeing that as well.
The thing is there's between the rhetoric and the action, there's a wide gulf. And I know a lot of Trump supporters who think that Trump's already done all of the things that you've laid out. That he's done all of these Buy American things, that he's whipping China into place. Because I've had these conversations with Trump supporters who believe he's doing those things because, well, they believe. And as you've pointed out, the rhetoric, he was on, and I give him credit for that. He pointed out what we've been talking about for years, what I've been screaming about the entire 15 years I've been doing this program. But he didn't do anything about it. In fact, I would argue he's made things exponentially worse by excluding all of our allies and not just excluding, but berating them and pushing them away to a point to where the next administration's got a lot of work and a lot of making up to do.
Yeah. And Rick, I don't know how you feel about this or your listeners, but as an American, I do think that we are exceptional in many ways, and we're endowed with many gifts. And it's not an exceptional based on race or religion or anything like that. It is about our values. And one of our values always has to be able to help the world in a time of need. And we've done this in military conflict. We've done it in a lot of different other ways when it comes to responding to disasters or emergencies. And we're not in a position to help this time. And I know the news is very focused on what's happening in the United States. And what's happening in the United States is a disaster right now, an absolute disaster. But this is also playing out all over Latin America and in a lot of developing countries that don't have nearly the resources that we have. And we're not in a position to be helpful in any way. And part of that is because we've lacked the capacity to do this. And even though Trump has called it the China virus and has used incredibly despicable racist language to describe all of this. And we did not get a clear heads up from China, although if he would have read the intelligence reports, he would have known something was coming. But we were still caught flat-footed. And there is no excuse for that. And particularly since we've known February, March, April, May, June, July, we're like 6 months into this now, we are still flat-footed. Yeah. And there are still hospitals now in these new hot zones where they have shortages of PPEs. And it's entirely because there has been a completely inadequate response on the part of our federal government to ensure that we have strong domestic supply chains to do this. And I know American workers, American manufacturers want to help, want to be part of the solution. Many of them have pivoted for this, but there's just no federal coordination whatsoever. So it is like the wild, wild west out there. And I don't know about you, but I don't like the idea of hospitals and others having to beg and to like go on Amazon and all this stuff to try to make deals to find this stuff. That's not the way it should be. It should be well organized, like a war response, and like your supply chains in a war response. And this administration has completely failed.
No, it's failed right from the beginning. And the other part of this that's frightening to me is the void that's being left by us not being able to help, because we can't help ourselves almost at this point. So we're clearly not going to be helping the rest of the world. So there's going to be a void of leadership there, and the Chinese are taking that over in large amounts and doing, I got to be honest, an amazing propaganda campaign to where they make themselves look like the good guys and us, well, not.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And the shame of it is, I mean, Beijing still are clearly utilizing this to try to exploit advantages and try to gain leverage and try to influence policy towards it and do all of these things that are going to be counterproductive for global global security and peace in the future, and more economic balance. But the countries can't say no because they don't have any alternatives right now, as you mentioned. And the problem is they sometimes get really crappy quality. And this has shown up. I'm not just saying this, but there have been many accounts where countries have gotten masks or other supplies that were not of high quality materials, did not provide the protection that they claim, were flawed in many ways. And it is like, I mean, that drives me crazy to see that. Not only that China is doing this, but that, again, there's this vacuum. There's this vacuum of global leadership because we are not prepared.
No, I mean, for me, it's to go back to something that I've been saying for a number of years. I'm a big fan of domestic production for domestic consumption. The idea that you make a high quality product and that we compete not on who's willing to slit each other's throats for pennies, but on who makes the best widget or whatnot or mask or whatever, and let the marketplace then decide based on quality, not by how exploitive your labor and environmental policies can be. And this is where I think our trade policies have to be completely revamped, and we have to do a much better job of holding countries like China accountable. Because I've had a couple of conversations recently with experts who are saying, look, our window is getting smaller and smaller to deal with China, and within a couple of years it will be completely out of control, and there'll be nothing left for us to do.
Yeah, and I would just say a go it alone approach is not the right answer. Just as like the TPP was not the right answer to try to contain China, because it would have backfired with our own domestic economy, and frankly, it was a model that drove down wages for manufacturing workers everywhere because it was much more about corporate greed. But I do think that there is an opportunity for the United States under the right circumstances to lead Europe and Japan and South Korea and other countries to build an alternative that the developing world and other nations can look at and say, yeah, I want to be a part of this, rather than be a part of China's sphere. But this administration, that kind of diplomacy has not been in their wheelhouse, and it's incredibly unfortunate. I mean, we've had the opportunity to rewrite the rules of trade with China, and what Trump has done has been, first of all, unilateral, and it hasn't been multilateral, and second of all, they've addressed some rules that will help big businesses like intellectual property and technology transfer. And look, I think these are all changes that should be made, but the fundamental structural problems with the economy in China, the state ownership of the enterprises that compete against private sector firms all over the world, or the environmental exploitation, the pollution, the labor exploitation, the currency misalignment, the massive amounts, the trillions of dollars worth of state subsidies that these industries receive. None of that got addressed in Trump's deal with China. And so, even though we got a deal with China, it's more of a purchase agreement, and it's not going to fundamentally alter the playing field. I think China's perfectly happy to have that because, as you alluded to, it sees it can run out the clock, not on Trump's presidency, but on accumulating enough wealth and eroding American alliances so that it is going to be able to achieve its objective to kind of roam free in Asia without any American influence. And so we do have an opportunity, but the window is closing. You're right.
We had John Bolton on the program not too long ago talking about his book. And in the book, he talks a little bit about China and what Trump actually accomplished. And it was really all about getting him reelected. There was never going to be a trade policy that was going to benefit our country. It was all about having the flashy headlines, hey, buy a bunch of our agricultural goods so that I can wave the flag and say I did something just to get reelected. And that's the scary part of this. I just don't think he's capable of doing this. So last line of questioning I've got for you, because we're in this moment where we can go on of how bad the leadership has been over the last couple of years with Trump in office, but there's now a massive void in our economy that Chinese money could come in and start buying up companies like Brooks Brothers, companies like our pork processors and our meat processors, and you go down the list of all the bankruptcies that are coming. Is there a way to stop this? Is there a way to stop that from happening, do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, well, as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, well, they already have bought some of that. Like Smithfield is
right.
owned
That's
by
why
a
that's why I said the pork processing plant.
Right, exactly. AMC Theaters owned by a Chinese company, and there are others as well. But there is a review system that's set into place called CFIUS, which is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, that's supposed to look at purchases and then decide whether there's kind of a threat to national security. I'm simplifying this quite a bit, but it's inadequate to a lot of the techniques that China uses, and it can stop some mergers or acquisitions, but it's harder to stop kind of greenfield acquisitions, like standing up a glass plant in Ohio or a train manufacturing plant in Massachusetts. And both of these are mostly conduits for Chinese imports that are also taking away market share from American competitors. And so, yeah, I do think that we need to be on the lookout. And I want to make clear, this isn't a cultural thing. This is not about blaming China for coronavirus or anything like that. This is about acting in our own economic interests, and also making sure that China's government, which has very different goals and values than the United States, is not able to erode our economic power or our systems or our economy. And so, yeah, I do think that we have to be on the lookout for all of that. We've urged policymakers to limit assistance, to exclude state-owned enterprises, particularly as they're considering a new infrastructure bill, as they're considering a new stimulus bill. And so we will keep at them, but you're absolutely right. And I don't view this as any sort of like a menace. I don't treat this as like a kind of like a McCarthyite thing. This is not what this is about. But this is fundamentally about American economic security interests and jobs, and China's government's plan to exploit our vulnerabilities and our weaknesses. And it's not just me saying this. It's, it would be FBI and intelligence directors, whether they're from the Obama administration or from the Trump administration. They're not making this up. This is a legitimate threat, and it's a system that has very different values than ours, that's willing to stifle dissent at all costs. You look at Hong Kong, you look at the Uyghurs, you can see how this plays out. And we at the very least, we shouldn't be complicit in any of this. And we should stand up for our interests and our values.
I'm right there with you, Scott. I appreciate the time, as always. Great talking with you. Thanks so much, man.
Likewise, Rick. Have a good one.
Yeah, you as well. Our good friend Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website, if you want to find out more about what they do and the work that they're doing. Highly suggest it. We'll get links out on social media. Love to hear your thoughts. Do you think China's a problem? Is this going to be, as I've been saying, the issue of this election? I'm sure Trump's going to want it to be, because a lot of his supporters think he's already done something, when the reality is, well, not quite. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1966. That was the day that the International Association of Machinists went out on strike. The day before, the Machinists newsletter, published out of Washington, D.C., declared strike set on 5 airlines. During the first half of the 1960s, the airline industry had invested in new equipment and jet technology. Now those investments were paying off in huge profits, and the workers wanted their share of the booming industry. In the article, IAM President Roy Scheimiller explained, quote, "These corporations netted more than $200 million last year. They are enjoying the greatest prosperity in their history. There is no question of her ability to pay. The issue is whether the employees deserve to share in the prosperity of their industry and how much." He went on to say, "Our members on these airlines are not satisfied with the offers made in negotiations so far. Under the American system and under American labor law, they have a right to strike. Only under communism and fascism are human beings forced to work against their will." At 6 a.m., the machinists were called to strike against United, TWA, Eastern, Northwest, and National. The striking workers picketed at 230 airports throughout the United States. It's estimated that 60% of all flights were impacted by the strike. The work action wore on for 3 weeks. Then the White House got involved. President Lyndon B. Johnson helped broker an offer of a 4.5% annual raise for the workers for each of the 3 years. But the union members voted it down. The vote was nearly 3-1 against taking the offer. Finally, the strike was settled after 43 days. The machinist members had won a 6% raise.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Donald Trump's national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, and his economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, evidently sent a letter to U.S. Railroad Retirement Board Chairman Erhard Chlorel, basically taking him to task over investments that the Railroad Investment Board, the Retirement Board, are making into China. Evidently, according to the letter, that the board has permitted hundreds of millions of dollars of railroad workers' retirement assets to be invested in companies from the People's Republic of China. They say that presents a national security risk to our country. They also go on to allege that it exposes the retirement fund of the railroad workers to significant risk, and it's funneling our dollars into the Chinese military. Now, is this just ramping up our war of words with China, or is this real? I'm of the mindset we've got to be taking real serious care over what happens over the next couple of years, as we've been talking about. Anyway, the Department of Labor came out with a new idea. They're going to open up our 401ks to some new investments, some new products. Is that going to be good for us? Well, a lot of reports I'm reading saying not so much. In fact, the one analogy, lamb to a slaughter, seems to keep popping up in here. To share some thoughts on, is this going to be a slaughter? I've asked our good friend Christian Weller to come talk with us. He's a professor of public policy there at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, also a longtime friend of the program. Christian, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Rick. Always.
So I saw this thing that the Department of Labor is deciding that they're going to allow riskier investments for managers of 401k funds to delve into. And immediately my mind goes back to 2008 and all of the wonderful financial products that Wall Street used to bring our economy to our knees. Am I being too paranoid?
Yeah, in this case you are. The proposed rulemaking here, I mean, we should say right from the beginning, in this case, the administration and the Department of Labor is actually standing in the way of people wanting to invest in less risky stuff, moving away from risky stuff. So what the Department of Labor is saying, and it is sort of a regular process that has to happen, is what can a retirement plan, either a defined benefit pension or a 401k plan, invest in for their people? What is legally required to make sure that an employer and the trustees of a plan, often an HR office, and some other people are not breaching their fiduciary responsibilities because they're making the investment choices. Like in the 401k, what that means is they're making the choice of what you can buy through your 401k.
Right.
And in the defined benefit pension plan, they allocate the money directly to that. But there is a growing movement and there's a growing acknowledgement that our retirement plans, especially 401ks, are extremely risky in one particular area. We have too much money invested in coal and oil, and in companies that have lots of climate risk, meaning they're building lots of buildings on right on the ocean front, right? That's going to be wiped out by the next hurricane, and that's going to cost the shareholders, investors in a 401k, a lot of money. Outside of 401ks, we do know that people want to buy stocks of companies that don't have climate risk. They want to put in renewable energies. They want to put in battery power. They want to put in solar technology. They want to put into businesses, into office buildings, into real estate companies that reduce their carbon footprint. What the Department of Labor now says, that's not good. That's not going to happen, or that shouldn't happen in your 401k. They're putting up extra hurdles for people to use their money into what's called environmental, social, and governance funds, ESG funds.
Okay.
But the point is, from an economic perspective, from a social perspective, we actually want people to move in there. I mean, it's not just because I like to reduce climate risk and climate change. It's also, these risks are massive. And when a hurricane hits a major city, it costs shareholders lots and lots of money. You want to, in your 401k portfolio, have as little of that risk as possible. But what the DOL is basically saying, no, we want you to invest in oil and gas and shale and all of that, and all of this green stuff, that's just feel good but has no economic value, whereas the economics actually show it actually has good economic value for your retirement, because if you put some money into companies that have very little climate risk, you're balancing out the oil and gas companies in your portfolio.
So when I see this,
the DOL now is saying it is making it extra hard because we have a political movement behind it that wants to keep money in oil and gas.
No, I'm right there with you, and I understand that, and you've laid it out that, maybe I'm not as freaked out as I was originally, because the original story that I saw was, Department of Labor is, coming up with a new fiduciary rule that, immediately my mind goes into, now you're going to have these people selling us, more mortgage-backed securities and more, things that you go,
right.
Maybe we shouldn't be getting into. But if what you're saying is completely accurate, and I don't doubt that it is, then that's not a bad thing. I'm just a little distrustful of this administration,
right,
and particularly this Department of Labor.
Well, yes, and again, I mean, the rule says a number of things. It's a proposed rule; it hasn't gone into effect, but it says basically, if you are a fiduciary of a 401k plan, you need to do extra research and document all of these, jump through all these extra hurdles. If you want to give people in your 401k the opportunity to invest in their money in sustainable technology. But remember, the rule speaks to something called ESG. Let's forget about the governance stuff, because that's sort of an old hat to some degree. That's just preventing CEOs from enriching themselves too much, if you believe it.
Too much.
The S is the part that I think for your purpose is really important. The S is the social one. Under the social umbrella, there is good evidence that companies that are treating their workers shabbily are also posing a risk for themselves, because there's lots of turnover, there's lots of costs, there's lots of liability issues, there's potential of strikes or wildcat strikes, and so on and so forth. Think about Amazon during the warehouse strikes and stuff like that. Those are real costs to shareholders, right? So a shareholder activism, or if I'm a 401k owner and I'm saying, look, I want to invest my money into a company that treats its workers well, I can get that fund. There are sort of companies that will tell you and will rate a company and how well they treat their workers. The Department of Labor now says that's all social feel-good stuff. That has no real economic value, even though all the evidence for the last 30 years actually does show that companies that treat their workers better are actually growing faster, are more stable, and less risky. So the point here is that the DOL is using its own political judgment to overrule economic evidence and thereby standing in the way of people, giving people more opportunities to use their money in a way that would actually reduce the financial risk in their retirement savings.
And because again, I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm just not believing it.
Well, no, like think about it this like I want to invest in sustainable technologies. I want to invest in worker-friendly companies.
No, I fully understand that.
It combines with it comports with my values, but also because I've looked at this for decades, I understand the evidence actually is it makes sense to doing that. It reduces the risk of my retirement savings because these companies are less risky. They grow more quickly, and they're often not very large, so I can't put all my money in there.
Right.
But what the DOL now is saying, you can't really do this unless you do all of these other things, and thereby like basically making it impossible for companies. Like you think about sort of your typical HR person. They have to do all the hiring and benefits and all of those policies, and then they have to be the fiduciaries for the retirement plan.
Okay,
and
so now you've made that clear to me. Because as you were going through this, I'm saying, we're opening up the 401ks to be able to do all these things. I'm going, that actually sounds good. I'm actually not against that. But what you're saying, and if I'm not misunderstanding you, is that they're making it more difficult for this to happen.
Right. That's exactly it. Sorry. Yeah. So basically, if you're an employee and you're going to go to your fiduciary, which typically is your HR person, at least they're one of them. You're saying like, look, I want more of these options. The HR person says like, yeah, I'm going to do this on my weekend free time because I have to now fill out all this extra paperwork and do all of this extra research and so on and so forth.
Right.
Document to the DOL, all of these so that I can jump over all of these hurdles. And that's in like a typical HR person, a typical fiduciary doesn't have the time or the money to hire somebody else to do it for them, and they're going to say like, we're not going to do it. And that explains that. If you think sort of outside of the 401k world, for instance, 25% of all money is invested in these ESG funds. Within the 401k world, only 1% is invested.
Yes.
The DOL has stood in the way of this.
Now the giant light bulb has gone on.
Right, and even worse, like because investing in a 401k is often so complicated, right? So like even if your HR person does all of this paperwork and says, now you have this option to invest your retirement money in a way that feels less risky, socially more valuable. You actually still have to actively research this on your own part as a worker with a 401k plan and then put your money in there, which most people don't. They basically do something else. They're just saying like whatever is your best recommendation, what's your default investment in a 401k. And the DOL has now said, even if you allow and you do all of this paperwork to have these ESG funds, these socially valuable funds, in your lineup, you cannot make them, they prohibit it explicitly, you cannot make them default investments. Right. Even though they're safe and even though they pay well, you cannot make them default investments. You have to give it to Wall Street.
Yeah, and this is where because all the stories that I'm reading around this are we're making sure that the highest risk, the highest fee-paying investments are the ones we're stuck with. So I'm reading all these stories,
Yeah,
and what I got from you at the beginning is, we're opening it up and we're doing all these other things. I'm going, that's great. I can't believe the Trump administration is doing this, only to find out, no, they're not. They're doing just the opposite.
No. Your suspicions of the Trump administrations are always warranted. So if you finally get sort of think about this menu, right? Like think about you go into a fancy restaurant and there is like this 10-page menu and you go through this and at the end you're always going to settle on the burger and the fries because that's what you know, or at least that's how I am. That's me. But that's how people are when it comes to retirement savings, right? And what we're now saying and what would make the most sense is a company that actually does its research should say like, okay, well, instead of maybe the beef burger, we'll make the turkey burger the default, and instead of the French fries, we make the coleslaw the default, and people live a little healthier. But the DOL says, no, you still have to eat the burger and the fries.
Yeah. So,
if you don't want to make a choice. And that one, I think, is truly, I think, the worst part of it. I mean, it like my colleagues and I, everybody has their own favorite part of it that they really hate. I hate the default one because I think that one is going to have sort of the largest effect. Like, even if an HR office as the fiduciary makes the decision, does all this paperwork, puts the good investments in the lineup, it still cannot make them the default investments. And that explicit prohibition, I think, is going to be sort of the biggest hurdle and the biggest drawback of this. What that alternatively means is you still have to put your money as a default. If you don't want to make an investment, it's all going to go in oil and gas and all of the other stuff that we used to and that we know is socially destructive.
And eventually is going to go belly up at some point.
Well, and that's the point, right? We know this stuff is risky. We know there is lots of climate risk out there. Like oil and gas is coming with enormous liabilities. It comes with oil spills in the Gulf of Mexico or when a pipeline breaks. That's tons of money out of investors' pockets, meaning 401k or retirement savers' pockets. We know that that's happening. And it becomes, within the retirement world, really difficult to get away from that. And
yes.
the DOL is basically saying, you're stuck with the pipelines that's going to burst and the platforms that are going to burst.
So then that makes a lot more sense, and I appreciate you outlining that because
I'm sorry.
Now it makes perfect sense now.
Yeah, it took me a few days to go through this myself.
Of why my suspicions.
Even though I've been studying this for like more than 10 years. But
right. So then the question becomes, what should we have done? What can the next administration do to undo this damage and to get us to the place that really sounded great at the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is basically do exactly the opposite. Allow companies, fiduciaries, through a safe harbor rule, sort of you tell fiduciaries, if you want to do this, you can do it if you meet X criteria. Sort of if you basically make sure that the fees are the same or that a fund has a certain label attached. These all come sort of like all these funds are graded by the consulting companies. And as long as you say, like, okay, well, as long as it gets a certain consulting rating, you can invest in that money. The other part is allow it to be default investments. If the HR office says we want these to be default investments, then the DOL should say, yes, we're going to hold, like, you meet your fiduciary criteria if you sort of have an independent consultant, and again, they're automatically attached to these ESG funds. If they say, like, this is good, this meets certain standards, there are international standards for these funds, you can make them default investments. Basically do exactly the opposite. Make the paperwork less and make it a default investment.
See, and then
the other part is and the other part is, and this is something that where DOL and SEC have to, the Securities Exchange Commission will have to work together, there is sort of make the standards for these funds more uniform than they are. Sort of what is climate risk? What is worker risk? Or like what is like a company? Like what are the standards? What are the metrics for treating your workers right? Right? What's the acceptable CEO pay to average worker ratio? What is a good diversity metric in terms of gender, race, and other measures? Right? Those things exist, and but the DOL and the SEC can do research and establish standards, and then a company can just simply say, like, okay, well, as long as a fund meets these standards, it can be in our 401k portfolio, and anybody who wants to invest in worker-friendly companies, gender-friendly companies, race-conscious companies can do so because we've gotten a standard set by the DOL SEC.
There you go. No, I that sounds great, and now I'm feeling a lot better. But Christian, I appreciate clarifying it for us. I appreciate you laying out what this is all about and giving us some good information. Thank you.
Well, thank you for pulling me back from getting too wonky and technical here. Appreciate that.
Staying out of the weeds. Thanks so much. Our good friend Christian Weller, professor of public policy there at UMass Boston. You're just good stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1862. Ella Reeves' mother Bloor was born in Staten Island, New York. She was a labor activist who investigated child labor in glass factories and mines. She also worked undercover in meatpacking plants to verify for federal investigators the horrible working conditions described by Upton Sinclair in his famous book, The Jungle. Ella Bloor ran for lieutenant governor of New York on the socialist ticket in 1918. In 1919, she helped to found the Communist Party of the United States of America, and later served as a delegate to the Second International. When she returned from the Soviet Union, Bloor hitchhiked around the U.S. while writing articles for the Daily Worker newspaper. Bloor worked closely with many notable progressives, including labor leader Eugene Debs. She was a founding member of Debs' group, Social Democracy of America. She agreed to write a children's column for the organization's newspaper before moving on to other political organizing. Later, she rejoined Debs in the Socialist Party of America. She helped fellow socialist Upton Sinclair gather information about the Chicago stockyards that became the basis of his book, The Jungle. In fact, Sinclair sent Ella with Mr. Bloor to pose as a couple to gather information about the stockyards. They were not married, but Ella adopted the name Mother Bloor. Bloor died on August 10, 1951. Her legacy includes the autobiography We Are Many. The book inspired Woody Guthrie's song, The 1913 Massacre. The song recounts the story of a massacre of striking copper miners in Calumet, Michigan at a Christmas party that Bloor attended.
Take a trip with me in 1913.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio said today that they're not going to reopen schools in the fall, not fully anyway. They're going to come up with a hybrid model that's going to limit in-person attendance to just 1 to 3 days a week. And you know, who knows what's going to happen in the fall. But what we've seen, the last couple of days is basically the all-out brawl, the political brawl over reopening schools. And look, who knows what 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month is going to bring us. If things continue, I don't know how you can reopen schools. But what we do know is the privateers and the profiteers are using this crisis as an opportunity to consolidate their power and really to push. And this is one of the things I was afraid of, that the charter people, the cyber charter folks, would take this opportunity, well, to ram that horrible medium down our throat. And here to share some thoughts on what's happening and what we can do, I have asked Sergio Flores to come talk with us. He's an executive board member with our good friends over at the Badass Teachers Association. He's got a new letter out, Dear Teachers Association Leaders Everywhere, written by Sergio Flores. Sergio, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really very happy to be talking to you and your audience.
So I'm reading through your your letter to all these different leaders, and one little segment popped out at me, and you said that the policies founded on neoliberal ideology have proven to be ineffective, disruptive, and damaging to public schools, teachers, students, and democracy itself. And you asked the question, isn't it time for your profession, your livelihood, and public education for you to do something? And I would say, yes, it's time.
Thank you. Thank you for answering. I would like every leader in the Teachers Association, every teacher, every rank and file teacher to say the yes that you are just mentioning right now. Because what we are dealing right now exactly is everything is on the line. I mean, the stakes are the highest there have ever been. Because we're not only talking about raises and benefits and all the little things, let's call it little things from the past. No, we're talking about life. Right now, we're talking about life. I mean, it's something that we have to really acknowledge that comes, I think, a good thing that comes out of this crisis, that it exposed how vulnerable we are living in this neoliberal bubble that was created and that we are believing. All the policies that we have, the competition, the choice, everything that comes from teacher assessment or dear life is right there on the line for teachers and all the schools that have been closed for no good reason at all. And we have been defunded, criticized, demonized. For what? We were saying, oh, this is the greatest country in the world. And this crisis just exposed the lie.
Right.
This is a sad lie. And all the neoliberal policies that we can name are either flawed, faulty, wrong, and damaging.
Now, when people hear neoliberal, what do you want them to think? I immediately go to privatization and profitization. What do you want people to think? Because it's a word that a lot of Americans haven't really gotten their head around. How do you define it?
I want to tell you, this is so funny because I have been defining it for a lot of people for the past 10 years, and this is a common word for a lot of people. Everything is exactly what you were saying. Privatization and profiting. That's exactly that. At the expense of the common good. That would be the key for everybody to understand. Neoliberalism is just the unregulated, unfettered capitalism when greed has and knows no limit. So everything is a commodity. You and me, all lives, nature are commodity for sale. So everything is just something that is placed on the market because these people, again, the corporate reformers, are very powerful and they have a greed that has no limit. So pretty much this is what we have now, this endangered world, when we are even talking, like you were saying at the beginning, we're talking about opening the schools because it's good for the market. They're thinking about the market. And you know what's the real risk here? Life. And they're not even thinking about it. They don't even talk about it.
No.
It's just what is good for the market. Think about it. I hope your audience, please think just slowly, carefully. This is about saying, we're going to gamble with the life because it's good for the market.
No, I think I read a quote earlier from Lily Eskelsen Garcia, the president of the National Education Association, who double dog dared Donald Trump to sit in a classroom with 39 kids and breathe and not have any preparation on how to get them kids out safely. But she said, this isn't a bar. This isn't a nightclub. These are kids' lives on the line. And I thought she was spot on accurate. I mean, we've opened up bars and now a lot of states have realized, bad idea. They've closed them back down. I don't want to see that happen in our schools where we swing the doors open and then all of a sudden have a massive spike and now we're in crisis mode.
And, Lily Eskelsen is an extraordinary lady that explains so clearly everything. I'm very sure, you had the privilege of listening to one of her explanations. For me, it is a very simple thing. Every teacher knows that they care about their students. Originally, all the teachers are the nurturing type, the people who care about the others. And they are now, I bet every teacher is in fear of being told to go to the schools. I mean, they want to teach, they want to do good, they want to do everything, but they know perfectly well what's on the line,
Right.
the lives of their students. And I want to tell you this, many teachers are not even thinking their own lives. They're thinking the students' lives, the parents that live with those students' lives. Imagine if we open the schools in this kind of environment, and we are going to just multiply the number of people who are going to be infected. And we are going to go from students to parents. We're going to have if we are having a hard time right now understanding how bad that is, just again slowly and think how this would be if we had it 5 times, 10 times more.
Yeah, and not just from the kids to the parents, but also the parents and the kids to the grandparents, and the mental scars that would come. One of the conversations I've had with my kids are, I know you want to go out and you want to do all of these things. What happens if you get it and you give it to us, or our parents' generation, and someone dies? That's something that you carry with you. I don't want to saddle a generation with they killed off Granny.
Exactly like that. And look, just to pinpoint to the audience a little bit more what dangerous an ideology like neoliberalism is exactly what you and I are discussing. You are just placing lives on the bet. You're saying, can we gamble with the kids' lives, the parents' lives, the grandparents' lives? I mean, this is ludicrous. I mean, the government should be right now trying to deal with this situation.
Yeah.
Trying to protect every single life, and you don't see that.
No, and
That is
the other part of
neoliberalism.
this is that it's this is a bipartisan thing. I mean, the attack on public education has been bipartisan for the last 20 years. You could argue that there are some on either side who have differing views, but mostly it's about destroying the public education system and putting it into the hands of the profiteers. But now it seems more about the tax dollars. I look at New York, which is doing some weird stuff. The governor of New York that you point out is again looking to someone like Bill Gates, who I think has caused enough trouble already, to reimagine what education is going to look like. Nothing good here for me.
Exactly. Look, I mean, think about this. The greed is their life in the neoliberal environment. Greed is nurtured. Greed is promoted. Greed is something that is almost a virtue for them.
Right, Gordon Gekko. Greed is good.
And profits are what matters to you, and that is why, for instance, your kids, my kids, they are commodities. And because you're a business person, all these neoliberal people think this is a business in which you might have some losses. Okay, if you have some losses, so bad, but as long as the profits keep coming. That is the key element here.
Right.
And it's very, very bad now that they're, I mean, I was in disbelief when I heard that the governor Cuomo was saying, let's talk with the billionaires in order to see what the future can be with more technology in our lives. I immediately, had this reaction, say, oh my God, they are just going to take this crisis and go for the jugular. That is what really scared me. And when you notice that, for instance, in California and some other states, they started saying, okay, we will have to cut funding for schools. That was the combination, the 1-2 punch. You say, oh my God, it's going to be bad right now, and when it's over, it's going to be worse.
Right, because I said at the beginning of this, Sergio, I said that my great fear is that at the end of this, when this is over, that my local public school, my local brick and mortar public school will be gone. Kids will be, sitting at home with laptops. We're going to move everything to these horrible cyber charters, and that's what kids are going to be saddled with. Honestly, I've been a little less concerned because I think parents are waking up to the reality that it's a crappy system, and kids don't like it. It's not good for them. But our policymakers, when you're talking to the bean counters, it's fiscally responsible.
Exactly, but this is the point. One thing is to be fiscally responsible, and I bet everybody knows the meaning of that, and everybody wants people who are seriously taking care of business. But another thing is when you say, hey, wait a minute, we are in a unique situation in which we have lost a lot of lives. Right now in the United States, we lost, the 130,000?
Yeah, over that.
Number? We passed the 130,000. For anyone who thinks that is an insignificant number or a number that doesn't mean anything to you, probably because you don't know anyone who has died or has been sick, I mean, I want them to think like this is the reality right now. And this is what these people who say they are fiscally responsible are thinking about. I mean, this is absolutely absurd if you think in terms of citizens. You first, then being a business person, you're a citizen. You need to take care of the citizens. That's why we have a government. The government is for the citizens to regulate their life around the state. We need the state right now to take care of business and help us go through this. After we are over, after we get through this, we can talk about recovering the economy and keeping the profits coming and all those issues that they want to talk about.
Yeah, later. So let me ask you a last line of questioning then,
yes.
Because I think we agree that the current path we're on is not good. It's bad for the future. It's bad for our kids. It's bad for the country, in my view.
Yes.
How do we as parents, how do we as citizens, how do educators, how do we take this moment and make sure that we don't continue down this path that we've been on, where the moneyed interest and education incorporated have been taking over more and more and more, and are going to, I fear, use this moment to continue to consolidate power? What should we be doing? What is the answer here?
Okay, in my letter, I actually outlined 3 basic points. The first one is we have to educate ourselves to see what neoliberalism is doing to us, because this is normal to us. It's normalized to talk about this situation in business terms. This
Right.
is not a business. This is our societies, our communities, our lives, our parents, our grandparents, our kids.
No, you're right.
This is
And
not-
if I can stop you there, you're right that we've normalized this business kind of thinking, that competition idea that, the public school should be able to compete, and, whoever, competes the best, they're going to win. When the sad reality is that for most of where this competition is supposedly happening, the deck's been long stacked, and it's stacked against
Exactly.
your local public school.
Yes, look, the next step is education is the first one. You need to understand what neoliberalism is, what it does to you. And then the second one is to acknowledge all the damage that it's been doing, because we are just everything being framed in those terms. We need to change the language. We need to take this language of ours, which is, I believe, you with your show just promote, is solidarity, justice, fairness, the search for the common good, which are the civic values in every community, in a crisis or after a crisis or before a crisis. We need those: solidarity, justice, fairness, the search for the common good, because that is going to be the brick and mortar for continuing with communities, with life in our communities. And the third one, I believe, is now to have concrete ideas. In every community, you have your own need. For instance, for me here in California, we need to convince the public to fund public education properly. It's a disarray here. California is a large state with so much inequality, despite being the 7th or 6th economy in the world. So this is not, proper or fair. In each community, for instance, in each state, I would love for teachers to start saying, hey, okay, guys, we need a state bank. We need a state bank so we can solve our problems here and not to depend on the Wall Street guys all the time, because everything is, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, you cannot do anything, because you need finances, and those finances, guess what, are not controlled by you. You have nothing to do with that. Just universal health care is another one. We need universal health care so you and me and everybody else has this at least level playing field, so we know that we are not going to lose our house or a car or whatever property just because somebody gets sick.
Yep.
We need a public school, a quality public school in every community. Forget about charter schools and anything else. We need a public school, well-funded, responsive to whatever the communities need. Those three, I have a long list, but I believe those three ideas will be very good for all teachers to tell their leaders. If you are, let me just tell these people, if you are a teacher, if you are a rank and file teacher or a leader in a teacher union, please use this language, take these ideas, because if this crisis is not going to kill us as the public education, as public school teachers, we need to come stronger. We need to come with a real plan and a real vision for a better world for each one of us in each community. And these are pragmatic, feasible ideas.
Right, and it's a good start. I hope folks will take a look at your letter. The Teachers Association leaders everywhere. We'll make sure we get it out on social media so folks will have a chance to take a look at it. Sergio, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. Great work. I look forward to talking to you again real soon.
I'm very grateful to your time. I really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sergio. Sergio is a board member, executive board member with the Badass Teachers Association. Let's make sure you check out his writing. Like I said, we'll get links out. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1939. That was the day AFL President William Greene called all affiliates to meet in Chicago. Greene sought to mobilize union leaders in a fight to restore prevailing wages on federal relief projects. Building tradesmen on WPA construction sites had started walking off the job in spontaneous strikes across the country 3 days earlier. The strike spread rapidly to 36 states, quickly turning into a nationwide walkout of over 150,000. Workers were outraged by provisions in the latest federal relief bill titled the Woodrum Act. New terms established the 130-hour rule, essentially slashing wages by more than half. It also called for a 30-day dismissal of all workers who had been on WPA rolls for 18 months. The AFL Building Trades Department stated the act would, quote, destroy national wage standards established through 50 years of collective bargaining. IBEW leader Daniel Tracy added that forcing a lower wage on federal relief workers would only aid building contractors in private industry to do the same. From St. Louis to Rochester, from Minneapolis to Akron, picket lines were solid. Organizers worked to build solidarity among unskilled WPA workers affected by the new starvation bill. Tens of thousands of strikers were fired in WPA-ordered dismissals. President Roosevelt declared there could be no strikes against the federal government. Attorney General Frank Murphy, former Michigan governor during the Flint sit-down strike, declared that striking against the government would build a fascist psychology. WPA administrators also threatened organizers with federal prosecution, fines, and jail time. But New York's Building and Construction Trades Council leader Thomas Murray authorized a strike of 32,000. He avowed, "This will be a strike to the finish."
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
That's the question. How many people are going to be sending their kids back to school here in the fall? And what's it going to mean? I mean, my wife and I have been having this conversation. What do we do? And we've been talking about this for a while. In fact, we sat our kids down back in May and said, we're going to see what happens as things open up. We will evaluate, based on what information comes back of how much opening up we're going to do. Because look, nobody wants to be the one responsible for killing off a parent or a grandparent or a relative. And it's one of these times where you go, it's predictable. it's, people's behavior very predictable. As soon as the governor said, this was a green area, you knew everyone was going to go, hey, it's party time. And, like I was joking last night. I went for a ride with my daughter, and I see on the side of the road there's a sign advertising the local strip club is going to reopen in Harrisburg, and my mind goes to, do you really think the strippers are going to be walking around with just masks on? No, of course not. And as these things reopen, all of these things are now front and center, and it's not good. It's not good times. In fact, it's fairly scary. Fairly scary stuff. Do you remember when Jim Baker, the televangelist guy, was sued by the state of Missouri over their miracle cure silver solution? Remember that? How bad is it? How bad does it have to be? How much fraud do you have to commit to get Missouri to sue you? But he did. We now see that a guy in Florida, this Mark Greenan, it's being reported that he is being charged federally for marketing his miracle corona cure. What do they call it? Something mineral something. Or I'll remember it in a minute. But it's this grand miracle cure, and it's just really high strength bleach. Miracle Mineral Solutions, I believe it was called, MMS. And again, he's a self-described archbishop of what has been described as a fraudulent, non-religious church. So he takes all of the mindset of religion and church, and has followers, and I guess, and all kinds of people who they try and bilk. And I guess thought this was a great idea, but him and three others, his three sons, they're being charged with criminal contempt, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and conspiracy to violate the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. And the thing is, and this is where, as I was reading through the story and I'm going through, so what? This is where I don't think horribly of me, but this is one of those moments where I'm a believer in you being responsible for yourself. I do believe in personal responsibility. I do believe that you're responsible for your actions, and I tell my kids this all the time. The kid who rides down the hill without a helmet on his bike and jumps off the ramp and cracks his head on the curb doesn't live to reproduce, and I'm okay with that. We do far too much to protect stupid people, and we've got too many of them. And I know it sounds really harsh, but the reality is we haven't thinned the herd early enough. We've got too many people hanging around who do dumb stuff, like, for instance, buying industrial bleach from some huckster on the internet and then ingesting it. Now, you could say, but Rick, the President of the United States did say that we could use, this bleach to knock it out, or, shove a light bulb up your butt. I don't know. And there would be some small, minute amount of me going, okay, no. See, that's how it works. Okay, no. No matter who says it, I'm still not drinking bleach. I'm not going to drink industrial bleach. I'm not going to drink something that is going to kill me. I'm not going to shove a light bulb up my behind. I'm just never going to do it. Just not going to do it. Especially if you bought it over the internet. Now, if you've got, certified doctors who say, this is a kind of, maybe I'll consider it. And even then, it just doesn't sound right. But evidently, there have been a number of cases of people who have gotten really, really sick from this. Which is why I guess they went after this guy, and they've charged him. I say throw him in the can, lock him away, him and the degenerates, and other people, stop. It's one of these things where there are no miracle cures. Stop trying to buy the snake oil. It ain't working. And by all means, anytime a religious zealot tells you that they've got the cure, run. Prayer's a good thing. Do that. But at the end of the day, I'm sorry, that alone isn't going to stop you from getting the virus. No matter how much you believe in Jesus and how much you believe in God, it's not going to stop you from getting the little particulates in the air into your lungs and killing you. It's just not going to help. You know what will help? The mask that God allowed us to make. See how that works? It's pretty simple. Go that route instead. You know, I remember a guy, and this is one of these moments where I always think of Snaggletooth, a guy I used to know years ago. He belonged to a snake venom church where they would literally reach into the box and pick up venomous snakes. This was their thing. And they didn't do it often, but they did. And I asked him the question, I go, what happens if you get bit? You know, what if one of these snakes decides they're going to take a chunk out of you? What happens? And he goes, well, we've got the anti-venom in the back. And I'm going, but what's the point then? If you're not going to die, if you're usurping God's will, what's the point? He goes, no. God gave us the ability to make the anti-venom. So he wants us to live. And it was really twisted. It's really bizarre. But now I'm thinking this logic through. For all of my religious friends, God gave us the ability to make masks. He gave us the ability to put things over our ears and cover our nose and our mouth so that we don't infect each other. That is maybe where we should go. Thank God for that. I'll take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
The only purpose this pipeline ultimately will serve is to boost the profits of its developers.
Big and bad news for pipelines, good news for those who oppose them. Japan reeling from another round of record rains and catastrophic floods. Plus,
we have a plan for building the 100% clean energy economy.
House Democrats unveil comprehensive climate proposal to reach net zero emissions by 2050.
No net?
No net.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Flushing the toilet may fling coronavirus aerosols all over. Our toilets have turned on us. Though I can't say I'm surprised after all we've done to them.
Seems only fair. This is your Green News Report.
It was only a matter of time before they rose up to exact their revenge.
Okay, Desi Doyen. After years and years of protests and struggles, we got a whole bunch of good news about pipelines all in one day.
Yes, but we'll get to that in a moment. First,
tease.
Japan is reeling again from another round of record-breaking torrential rainfall over the weekend that triggered widespread deadly floods and mudslides that have killed at least 34 people on the island of Kyushu. Japan has been repeatedly battered by devastating extreme storms in recent years that have killed hundreds of people. Climate scientists say the storms have been intensified due to man-made global warming. In politics,
we are releasing a transformative roadmap for solving the climate crisis.
House Democrats, right before the July 4th holiday, unveiled a sweeping plan for climate action and economic recovery by establishing the groundwork for steering the country to net zero emissions by 2050 with a focus on environmental and racial justice. The 547-page proposal outlines targets and policy mechanisms for establishing a price on carbon emissions and eliminating carbon pollution from cars by 2030 and from power plants by 2040. It embraces much of the Green New Deal without actually calling it a Green New Deal. It won't pass the Republican-controlled Senate today, but the proposal shows voters what Democrats plan to do on climate change.
Good idea. Although, better idea, don't release the plan right before the 4th of July when no one's paying attention.
Good point. Meanwhile, a pipeline palooza of bad news.
Bad news?
Well, bad news for the pipelines.
Okay.
First up, the U.S. Supreme Court on Monday refused a bid by the Trump administration to jumpstart construction on the controversial Keystone XL tar sands pipeline from Canada. The court kept in place a lower court ruling that blocked the use of a key federal fast-track water permit, but only for the Keystone XL, not for other pipelines. They will be allowed to proceed while environmental reviews are underway.
But the Supreme Court said no, essentially, for now, to Donald Trump on Keystone XL?
Yes.
That's good news, not bad news.
Right. The court's rejection means that almost all Keystone XL construction is delayed until at least 2021.
Sad trombone.
The controversial Atlantic Coast Pipeline, an $8 billion fracked gas project, is now kaput after two of the nation's largest utilities announced they are abandoning the project due to increased regulatory scrutiny and delays that ballooned costs and hampered the project's profitability. The stunning cancellation from Dominion Energy and Duke Energy comes just weeks after the U.S. Supreme Court cleared the way for the pipeline to cross underneath the iconic Appalachian Trail.
Nobody wants pipelines. So sad.
But there is a twist. In a separate deal, billionaire investor Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway has purchased all of Dominion Energy's natural gas pipeline and storage assets. If approved, Berkshire Hathaway will then control nearly 20% of the nation's interstate natural gas transmission, which would be an incentive to lobby against climate legislation.
Buffett.
And finally, in North Dakota, the biggest pipeline news of all today, a federal judge has ordered the controversial Dakota Access Pipeline to be shut down and emptied completely until the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers completes a more in-depth environmental impact assessment. This is a huge victory for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, which has fought the Dakota Access Pipeline since it was first proposed, calling it an unacceptable threat to their drinking water supplies and sacred cultural sites. Anti-pipeline protesters were met with violent crackdowns from state officials. Back in March, after a preliminary ruling by the judge, the attorney for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, Jan Hasselman of Earth Justice, told the Green News Report,
"This is a huge victory for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and all the people who have supported them over the years. The risks of an oil spill are too great, that the consequences on the Standing Rock are too significant, and this needs to be studied really carefully and in a transparent way."
Important to remember that this is a temporary victory. It's not over yet, but the party may be over for pipelines.
They are, of course, going to appeal this decision, but this is exactly what the Standing Rock Sioux had said. There was no proper environmental study done. Now, maybe it will be.
Maybe.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So tomorrow should be the end of the Supreme Court term of cases being released. And the big one I think everyone's going to be looking for is the Supreme Court's going to rule on whether the state of New York, prosecutors there in New York, get to see Trump's financial records. It's only been, 4 years now that we've been fighting over the tax returns and the financial records? Now we'll find out what the Supreme Court is going to decide. I think I'm going to put my money on no. I'm going to put my money on them not allowing. But we'll see. We'll see how this plays out. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top news of the day and all the stories going around, our good friend Bob Ney, former congressman and one of my favorite political analysts. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick.
So, any thoughts? Any thoughts on how that's going to swing?
I'm going to bet no. I'm going to go with what you think. I'm definitely going to do that. And this would, if it would happen, it would really reshape the entire balance between lawmakers, the White House, in a very, very big way. It really would if that were to happen. But I just have got one of those feelings. Of course, you never know about the court, but I've got a feeling it's not going to happen.
Yeah, because but there's part of me that goes, at some point we've got to, once this administration is over, we've got to make sure that this kind of stuff never happens again.
Well, right. I have some friends of mine, and I'll go out on the limb here with my opinion on this with my friends. It's been out on the limb because they're angry with me over it in a sense. But, they're saying, okay, if the court doesn't rule, then Joe Biden needs to say, nope, I am not debating you until you produce your taxes. And I told my friends, I really, I understand, but I don't think it's a good strategy.
No, it's a bad strategy.
It's a bad strategy. And they said, no, it's a good one. It'll force Trump. I said, it'll force Trump to do nothing,
And why would it force him to debate with Biden? I mean, because, the hope is if I'm Trump, I want every opportunity to debate Biden, but I don't need it.
Right. Well, also, when people were talking about this, in the debate, and they don't want Biden. I even read a column on it. I think it was Friedman's, and Joe Biden shouldn't debate. But come on, I mean, how much worse could it be for Biden if he debates? I'm serious. Trump's going to make stuff up. So if they say, well, Biden makes stuff up, well, Trump's going to make stuff up. So, but I think using the leverage, I won't debate till you produce your taxes. That's just, I don't think it's a starter.
And we'll see if Joe Biden, challenges him to a push-up contest.
Right, exactly. That's true.
I forget which state it was, but he wanted to call a fat guy the fat guy. Will he call Trump a fat guy and make him race up and down the aisle?
Well, Trump will. Then he'll do golf swings. Challenge Biden to golf swings.
But again, we're talking about all of the things outside of what we need to be talking about, and the sad reality is policy-wise, nothing's getting done. But fortunately, and this is, I guess, a good thing. The things that we are talking about are not good for Trump.
Well, if you look at how it was all turned, Trump had the immigration, the wall deal going right. That's went sour. And then you look at the virus, which originally he was doing okay with the numbers originally. That's went really bad. If you look at that, and then of course the economy and the faith people have in him in the economy, and that has went bad. So the determiners went bad. Now I saw a very interesting column. I don't know if you saw this by Mike Dukakis. He wrote a column warning, hey, I was way ahead of Bush 41, and he warned about, certain things that could happen. But this is still, and I read the Dukakis article, but, Rick, this is a different time and place. And so I think that what happened to Dukakis will not automatically happen to Biden. It's a different time. This virus it's a unique time.
No, I mean, Dukakis, he did a lot of dumb things.
Right.
But you're right. We weren't in the middle of a global pandemic. There weren't all of these things going on. Now, and I hate to say fortunately, but and not even good for Biden. But the things that are happening, the virus, people, as you've said, are turning away from Trump. You see all of these protests out in the street, and all of this division that he's bringing. That I think most people want just to stop. So that's not going in his favor. And it looks like we're getting our butts kicked by China at every turn, and even that his signature thing isn't going right.
Right. Well, that's where Biden has to come to terms with three things: the economy, and the virus, and China.
Yeah.
He has to come to terms really with those three things and have his mantra too. Don't forget about health care. He's got to do that. If Trump would have had his way, which I really don't think he wants his way with health care, but if he had his way, then that's a pandemic in itself. If the court undid the ACA,
no, that's we would be in a serious mess then. You're absolutely right. But this just the other day, Joe Biden came out with his plan to strengthen our manufacturing of our supplies during this pandemic, which for me was kind of was a moment where I said Biden I think might be getting it, because you remember I've brought this up before. Biden, when asked about China, said China wasn't a problem. I'm hoping we're in a moment where he's realized that China kind of is the problem, and Democrats better come around to the idea of how they're going to deal with the massive loss of jobs in manufacturing and how to claim some of that back.
Well, I like it because I call it the buy-in process, and you and I we see eye to eye, and we've talked about this. But on the Republican side, when they hired Bolton, I call it the buy-in process. Oh, that's perfect. What a great hire, And of course, when Bolton did what he did, what a horrible hire. But Republicans automatically, because Trump did it, that's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I think with the Democratic side, and you mentioned this, and it really struck me the day you mentioned it a few months ago. But they have to be very careful that just because Trump fights China, that they got to go opposite and support China, and they walk that line.
No, and that's, I've been getting hit by that all the time. Well, you want Trump to get reelected. No, I don't want to get our lunch eaten by the Chinese. That's my first goal.
Right.
As bad as Trump is, I don't want Xi Jinping leading this country, which, the reality is at the rate they're buying us up, we could be a colony of China at some point in the near future.
Sure. When there was an audit of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac at the time, I was on the committee with Maxine Waters. I chaired, and she was the ranking member with the Financial Services Subcommittee. Maxine and I wanted to call in Fannie and Freddie to our offices to have a meeting together to, say, what on earth are you doing? Rick, they put us off for the meeting, which I said to Maxine, I don't know what's going on, why they would do that. And then they came in and apologized. When the guy walked in, I remember his name, Mitch Delk. You know what he said to us? I am so sorry that I did this to you, but I was in China. And we said, oh, what were you doing? He said, well, calming them down because of this audit situation. And we said, well, why would you be doing that? And he looked at us, he said, well, they hold our portfolio for our housing. We're like, really? And he goes, oh, yes.
Yeah,
he said they dumped the portfolio. He said, we dumped. And I mean, our jaws dropped because that's how much they're into us.
And how many years ago was that?
That was in 2000. That was right after 2001. Yes.
And it's multiples times worse today.
Right. So it's an issue.
Scary stuff. You brought up the wall there a second ago, and I started off today's show by saying I think the wall is going to finally get built, and I think Mexico is going to pay for it. I've got this. I've got it in my mind right now that
I know where you're going.
That with the virus and everything, that the people of Mexico don't want us, we coughers and people who don't wash our hands or cover our faces. They don't want us marching into Mexico. I think they're going to build the wall.
Well, they actually are stopping us at certain border crossings because, talk about reversal. Mexico is literally, and top political figures in Mexico are saying, look, we got to keep the Americans out of here because of the virus. They are. And in the border areas, they're saying we just can't have the Americans crossing the border.
Yeah, and I'm waiting for, like I said at the beginning, I'm waiting for one of those Mexican officials to come out and say, like Trump did with they're all rapists and murderers. They're all coughers and they're all diseased and they're all sick and they don't cover their mouths or wash their hands. They're all filthy. They're dirty, dirty people. We need to build the wall to keep the Americans in their country. I'm waiting for it, man.
Right. I read that article today again and I thought, oh, wow, what a reversal.
Yeah, well, it's our stable genius, right?
Right.
I wanted to ask you about the new ICE plan that's coming up. Evidently, if colleges don't reopen in the fall, I guess the plan is for ICE to deport anyone who was attending those schools if the schools go to online. Can they do that?
Well, they can, but if this happens, this will be chaos, and it will be long-term chaos. And I had some people today, and I was checking their temperature on. They're like, well, foreign students. I said, wait a minute. First of all, these are all vetted and approved students, went through a rigorous vetting process, right? They came here. They rented places with long-term leases, right? They've got car loans, and they're paying this themselves. They're not taking any money from the government, and they are paying very high fees to our colleges. So ICE, all of a sudden, without warning, said, if you go online, which, by the way, Harvard and MIT are totally online, if you go online, you better, in 2 weeks, find a new college. Good luck on that. Find a new college, or you leave the country. Well, I think we open ourselves, first of all, to massive lawsuits for that, because what about their leases? What about, the money invested? And number two, let's say Harvard is going to go online, and then the next semester they don't go online. Does anyone in their right mind think that this government of ours will say to the students, "Oh, why don't you come back to the United States?" No. They will let it go another 1 or 2 year process. It's very unfair. It will financially just really hurt the colleges. But the reason they're doing this is not the legal immigration, because this, through Miller in the White House, Mr. Miller, they're anti-legal. But they're doing this to force the universities to open. That's why they're doing this, because this says to Harvard, you don't open, we're going to get you. We're going to take your money away. But the repercussions, and number two, the repercussions of people coming to the United States, they will be taught overseas. Don't go to America. Go to Canada or England for your education, because they're going to do this to you. Now, people can say all day long, well, that's great, they're not coming here. But I'm sorry, we've got a lot of good minds coming here, paying some pretty darn good money to come here into our colleges.
No, I remember when I was going back to college in the 80s, we had a lot of foreign students who came in, and, I learned the gig back then. They paid full tuition, every bit of it. And the reason the colleges kept jacking up the prices and giving more, financial aid out to people was because these foreign students were coming in paying every dime. And it was a way to fleece them. And help, subsidize some of the other students. And we've just done that on steroids over the last, 30 plus years now.
Ohio State University, I believe, is $66,000 for a foreign student. American is be $32,000. I think it's $66 a year. So yes, they pay a lot of money. But also, it's a matter of, our commitment. We said they could come here. We vetted them through a process. We let them come here, and now we say, you got 2 weeks. I mean, we're literally destroying lives.
Right.
Literally. So Harvard and MIT are suing the government and said, this is outrageous. But I saw this one. But people have to remember something, that it's one thing when Trump went after, quote, illegals, right? It's one thing, and that can be debated. People have to realize this administration is after every ounce of legal immigration. Every ounce of it, they're after it.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, when they throw around white nationalist and white supremacist about this administration, every action, you don't need the labels, their actions prove that. But, the other part of this that, nobody ever talks about having, a lot of foreigners come into our education system is they take it back with them. And this is how we spread our democracy or our kind of thinking. So if we are again going to leave another void in the international community, where's that going to be picked up? And my fear is it's picked up in places like China, and we're no longer that shining city on the hill. We're no longer that beacon of hope.
Right, and you make a great point. You can look at students that have come here, and they're in key government positions back in their countries, and you can see that. The Iran nuclear deal, Javad Zarif, the foreign minister, came here. He was educated here, knew our ways, and when Obama was president, they did a deal which, put all of the nuclear ambitions in the back burner. Of course, it's been undone now, but it was part of the fact that he had been here. I mean, we can look at examples all around the world, and we're going to miss out on that. And you're right; they're going to go somewhere else. They'll go to China, go to Canada, England. They'll have a place to go to, but it won't be here, and we will lose for that.
No, I mean, at every turn, because of this administration, we are losing at every turn. It's just terrible. Finally, the big convention, I guess in Jacksonville. I guess the mayor of Jacksonville, has he backed off the mask thing yet?
No, I actually called Florida today, by the way. I started calling chambers of commerce, and Jacksonville, and I called down Clearwater, et cetera. I just wanted to start seeing what they would say, but no, he hasn't backed off of it, and the prognosis for Florida is not good. So I think there's going to be even more pressure for masks, to be worn. But I think so far he's into a fight with the administration, and of course it's two conventions now. The business side down in the Carolinas, and then of course the acceptance side, quote, in Jacksonville.
Yeah, the party side.
5 Republican senators, I believe, or 6 as of today, said they're not going.
Yeah, if you're one of the Republican senators, especially one of the older ones, is it bright? I mean, is it really smart? I mean, I don't know if you saw the story that out of Tulsa, Herman Cain ended up getting the coronavirus at the rally in Tulsa. Do you really want to be the guy who's the poster child for stupidity?
Well, yes, and you don't want to be is the answer. And number two, these days, if you're running for office and you're a Republican senator, just stay in your state.
There you go.
Stay in your state.
It is that simple. Good stuff, Bob. As always, I appreciate the time, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you.
Our good friend Bob Ney, and he's right. Stay home. Stay home. Now look, there's part of me that goes, go ahead, go get sick. Go be like Herman Cain. Go be like the pizza man. Quick break, right back.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. Chances are you may never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, inspecting an elevator, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, in talking about a wall, we in the Smith family are going to be tearing down a wall. So, yes, Mr. Smith, tear down that wall. We've got a retaining wall in our backyard that needs some attention. It's been one of those things that's been on the honey-do list for about, 10 years. It's like a lot of things. I've got a big, long list. I've got a list of about 1,000 things that are just not going to get done today. The wall was one of them, so we've now decided that there's going to have to be a tearing down of the wall. So on Thursday, we're going to reenact the Reagan moment of Mr. Smith tear down that wall, and we're going to tear it down. And then we're going to play Donald Trump, and we're going to build the wall. In fact, my kids came up with a great idea of going to our neighbor and asking them to pay for it. So I'm kind of interested. It's one of those things where, if it weren't for the virus, I would march right up and make a show of it. But they're older and they're friends. And I don't want to expose them, but I do want to as part of the gag to see if they'll pay for it. And hey, maybe they will. Maybe the magical thinking like Donald Trump had of Mexico paying for the wall. Who knows? Maybe they'll be real good sports about it. Go, sure, we'd love to pay for your wall. Now it's obviously not going to block their view. I mean, we're not creating a dividing wall. It's just we have a hill in the back of the house, and it holds some of the hill back so we can have an area that's on flat land. So it's not a divider. It's simply a space maker. But we'll be doing that this weekend, and again, one of those things that click off the list. Very happy about that. I did want to get to, before we wrap up today, the Supreme Court's decision in Trump versus Pennsylvania. And you got to love how Republicans choose cases. The Little Sisters of the Poor, St. Peter and Paul Home versus Pennsylvania, which is the case that says employers don't have to offer contraceptive measures to their female employees. The Little Sisters of the Poor, it's against their religion, it's against their values, it's against their code for them to offer their employees contraceptive care, which is kind of bizarre. And I agree with the Little Sisters of the Poor not having contraceptive care because, as someone who grew up Catholic, we were told, now we knew better, but we were told that the nuns weren't supposed to have sex anyway. So why would the Little Sisters of the Poor need contraceptive care and I agree with them. They shouldn't have to give them something that clearly they're not allowed to use. But for everybody else who didn't say that they were going to be celibate for their entire lives, they do need this. And for me, it highlights the fact that we need to go away from an employer-based healthcare system. We need to end the monopoly and the stranglehold on employers holding us hostage and holding our health insurance. We need to end that and end it immediately. We need to go to a public system where people have the option to buy in. And look, if you want to buy private insurance, you go right on ahead and do it. But there should be a public option. At the minimum, we should be strengthening the ability for every person in this country as a matter of the right of citizenship, the right of humanity to have access to good quality, affordable health care. And it starts with insurance and who's going to pay the bill. So this decision to me, the right one, absolutely. Nuns should not need contraceptive care, but everyone else should, which is why we ended. Just my thought. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.